Hey, everybody. Pastor Caleb here, and going live a little bit before 10 o'clock today, which is fine because the wonderful thing about YouTube is that everything gets recorded, so you can watch this later if you want to. But today I have no actual questions that came in from any of our members or anybody else, so I don't have to talk about anything. I can talk about whatever I want. But actually, seriously, the thing I wanted to talk about today, because no one asked me any questions, was a series of events that happened in my life that gave me some wonderful perspective that I just want to share with you, because it's good to share Christian knowledge. And I think that's the point of these Saturday morning gatherings for me, is to wrestle with Christian ideas in a totally authentic, I haven't really put together a script or anything like that. I'm just wrestling with them out loud with you so that you can see that the Christian faith is not just pat answers or memorizing things, although it's good to have answers and it's good to memorize, but that you would see that the Christian faith is something that you need to wrestle with. It's something you need to engage your brain with and think about and see around you. So a couple things that lead up to this conclusion that came to my mind. So my wife and I have been using this app on my phone that was recommended by my sister. Actually, if you watch the video that we did on our channel where I interviewed my sister about mental health. In fact, hopefully at the later, once this is processed, I'll put a little card here on the screen where you can click on her video. But in it, she recommended this app that's good for couples, just to incite conversation, to have back and forth, learn a little bit about each other. And we've actually really enjoyed that app. That's really been fun for us. At least for me, I know I've really enjoyed just like asking questions of my wife that I wouldn't have thought to ask. So really encourage you to use that. In fact, I'll show it to you here. So the app is called the Gotham Card Decks. I don't know if you can see this, but it kind of looks like this. Oh no, no, you're not going to see it. Too bad. Too bad for you, YouTube. Gotham, Gottman card decks. And we found a lot of benefit from going through those. Anyway, so one of the things that came up in the Gotham card decks was just like date questions. So there's a number of categories. One of them is date questions. And the question was, what's your favorite movie? Or what is your partner's favorite movie? And my favorite movie is really hard to nail down because I'm not that much of a movie fan. I just don't find the time of sitting down and watching movies all that productive. Maybe that makes me a dark-souled person, that I can't stand that kind of entertainment, even though I'll sit and watch like 4 episodes of a TV show, which is essentially the same amount of time, whatever. Anyways, my favorite movie is the Matrix. You remember this movie? If you're older than me, you probably remember it, because I feel like, I'm 29 years old. I feel like my age group is maybe the last age group that really interacted with the Matrix. The only place you might have interacted with it now is syndication, really. It's on TV, which is part of this story, actually. But most people under my age don't know that movie. If you're especially a Gen Xer, like you're in your 40s, 50s, that was a really popular movie. So you probably know about it. My favorite movie, for a number of reasons. First of all, it has lots of guns and shooting, but it's not gory. And maybe that was what my teenage brain really wanted, like to feel righteous about myself, that there wasn't a lot of gore in the movies, because that's what my dad always said. That movie's too gory. It's like, yeah, I suppose. So I'm not going to watch it. Like Saw. I watched Saw when I was in high school. That was terrible. It gave me nightmares. But anyways, so lots of guns, but not a lot of gore. We could talk about whether Christians should watch movies with lots of guns, but that's what attracted me to the movie. And then, of course, the cutting edge special effects of the camera angles and the way that they were able to do the visuals. And despite I know that there's been some criticism of the soundtrack, I thought the soundtrack was really cool. I was also like, a teenager, so what do teenagers know about good music? But I love this movie. And so we were talking about this. And then another podcaster that I listened to, YouTuber podcaster, mentioned this movie as his favorite movie, and also that he's learned quite a bit about his Christian faith from it. So I've got this swimming around my brain, like, oh, Matrix, I should watch that again. Turns out, comes on TV last night while I'm watching. My family's all gone to bed, and I'm watching TV at night, and The Matrix is on. I don't watch the whole thing because it's already started, but I tune on to it for a little while, and I remember so much of this movie and what is spiritual about it, and how in many ways it epitomizes what we feel as North Americans, first of all, but then also, I think, in a secondary way, as Christians. So if you haven't seen the movie, you should go see it. Don't watch it with your kids, probably. But I'll give you the basic premise of it, just for those of you who haven't seen it. There is a uprising of robots, of machines that humans have made around the turn of the 21st century. This movie is made in the 90s. Around the turn of the 20th century, the machines uprise. The AI becomes sentient, and it takes over humanity and subjugates all human beings into becoming essentially batteries, because the human being creates a whole bunch of electric pulses. It's how our brain works, whatever. So they take the power and they use the human being as battery to power their whole machine civilization. Now, the human beings, they don't keep them in a coma. They actually plug them in and use their brain, their consciousness, in a computer program where every one of them is living. And the computer program is what we see around us today. So in the movie, I would be living in the computer program because everything's nice, relatively, and everything seems to be going okay. That's the computer program. And the point of the movie is that there are some people who have unplugged from the computer program, and they're in the real world that's been basically, charred over by the destruction of these machines. The machines are living in this place where, the clouds are so thick, the smog is so thick, the sun doesn't even shine anymore, and whatever. And inside that real world, they're trying to defeat their machines so they can unplug the rest of humanity and save humanity. That's the basic premise of the movie. So, what does this teach us about North American culture? Well, first of all, there is this deep sense in most North Americans that they are being sold a bill of goods. Also last night, I was up for a long time last night. Also last night, I watched a documentary on flat Earth, which was interesting to me, and kind of the flat Earth people and why they think what they think. And it just helped me understand a little bit more of the attractiveness of conspiracy theories, which, whatever, flat Earth, it's a whole nother video I should do on flat Earth. But why people are attracted to conspiracy theories and why most people believe some sort of what you could basically call a conspiracy theory, right? That there are a whole bunch of people who are trying to control your thought on a certain thing, whether the earth is round, whether Jesus was the Son of God, whether we actually landed on the moon, whether JFK was shot by, the guy from the tower in Dallas, whatever. Like, we all tend to have at least one quote unquote conspiracy theory. And so the movie speaks to that really well by helping sort of identify us with those conspiracy theories and say, we have these things that we sort of think are not right. We sort of think there's some control happening behind those things. And there's got to be a way out. We have to unplug. So, you can see this from a political point of view right now. I'm just going to pick large categories, but if you're a conservative or a Republican, you're looking at the Democrats or the liberals, and you're saying, wow, they control the media and they're this and that, and they're trying to get everyone to be indoctrinated, and they're taking over the public schools, and they're trying to basically create robot people who just follow whatever the machine tells them to do. Okay. On the other side, you have a liberal Democrat point of view that looks at the Republicans and he says, you're trying to indoctrinate them with your religion, and you don't care about other people. You're trying to force brainwashing on your children, not through the school system where we can actually regulate and we can have lots of input, but you're just trying to take your niche topics of whatever this religion believes that this thing, and then you're forcing your children to believe that and not giving them the chance to think it out themselves and figure out their own conclusions. And so everyone kind of thinks that everybody thinks everybody is on the other side. So anyways, this movie speaks to this. And for North Americans, I think it's obviously very culturally relevant because of the time and era that it came out and the way that it speaks to the culture. Gen Xers were the ones who primarily consumed this movie. And they were the product of the baby boom generation. The baby boomers, for like, and I say this with the most humility to know that there are definitely flaws with millennials and there are definitely flaws with Gen Xers, but one of the flaws of the baby boom generation is generally materialism. So they bought this beautiful, perfect white picket fence life because they had the means to do it, and then essentially said to the Gen Xers, you guys do the same thing and you'll get the same outcome. And Gen Xers did it and they didn't. And so they felt this strong, adverse, emotional reaction to the idea of the machine and being plugged into the machine. That's where you get a lot of things like, the punk rock grunge movement of the 90s and what we kind of have now, which is sort of the anti-establishment, anti-institutional worldview that everyone basically has to some extent now in North America. So this movie made me start to think about Christianity, because Christianity it looks at the world as something that Satan controls, right? The Bible talks about Satan as the prince of this age, the ruler of the kingdom of the air. So right now, he rules this place. Now, God is the ultimate ruler. He is over all things, and he has Satan on a leash, and Jesus, by his death and resurrection, has bound Satan. Jesus says, I have to go in and bind the strong man. How can you plunder the house unless you bind a strong man? Well, Jesus is saying, the house has you, sinner, and Satan, you are in Satan's house, and I'm going to bind the strong man so that I can take you out of Satan's house. However, he still rules here. And when Paul says in Ephesians that we don't fight against flesh and blood, but we fight against the principalities and rulers in darkness, the rulers of this dark age, and he's talking about the demons. He's saying, look, there are spiritual forces behind these things that are happening. It doesn't mean that like the president or the prime minister or anyone is like possessed by a demon, but in a sense, they kind of are, because sin, which Satan pushes through his temptations and his demons push, causes a lot of things to happen where men try to grab for power. That's kind of just how it works, right? So Christianity is unplugging from the matrix. It's unplugging from the matrix, and it's saying, I am not going to just allow whatever happens around me to happen and just accept it because of what it is. Rather, I am going to, as Paul says in Corinthians, take every thought and make it captive to Christ. I look at the world and I say, just because the world tells me that's a good thing doesn't mean I'm going to believe it. I'm going to put every thought up against the scriptures and compare them and say, what does Christ say about this? And I'm going to let Christ's word be true. I was particularly struck by this in one of the sections of the movie that I was watching last night, when Morpheus, who is kind of the godfathery character of the movie, says to Neo, who's played by Keanu Reeves, who is sort of the protagonist of the movie. He says, he's trying to explain this idea of the Matrix and the real world and everything. And he says, I didn't say it was going to be easy. I just said it was going to be the truth. And that's what Christianity offers you. It's not saying it's going to be easy. Like, being a Christian is hard. You are pushing culturally against everything that Satan is doing with the massive tidal wave of culture that he is pushing, not just on North America, but on the world. You're pushing against it. But it's true. And I think Christians don't want it to be difficult. They want it to be easy. They want it to be easy to be a Christian, but I don't think it can be. If Jesus says, if you want to be my follower, you need to deny yourself, take up your cross, and follow me, then I'm pretty sure it's going to be difficult. You're going to receive hate. You're going to receive persecution. And if you're not, maybe people don't know you're a Christian. And by that, I don't mean that they don't know that you go to church or that you call yourself a Christian, but that you don't live like a Christian. I was listening to another podcast this week that said that Christians in North America are not acting like Christians. And therefore, we're not being persecuted like Christians around the world because we've been able to separate the identity of Christian from what that identity naturally leads to in our lifestyle. We've been able to say, I am a Christian, I'm a believer in Jesus, and separate that from what Jesus said that would mean, and said, like, your life should look like then. So once Christians actually start to believe what their faith is, when they actually unplug from the matrix, because right now I think a lot of Christians are still plugged into the matrix, once they actually unplug from the matrix and start to take every thought captive to Christ and live by it, which I'm not saying is easy. Like, I'm struggling with this. I struggle with it every day, which is why I do a show like this with you. Once we're willing to do that, we're going to see truth. We're going to be able to actually fight the battles that actually matter. Rather than yell about politics or about culture, to actually live a life that communicates to the rest of the world that we believe something different. I was listening to a sermon by Tim Keller. I don't agree with everything Tim Keller says, but he says some pretty smart stuff. Tim Keller was saying, if you are a Christian, if you believe the message of the gospel, then you will have to try to convince people of it. That's just naturally what happens. If you actually believe it, you will try to convince people of it because it's that glorious of a message. And anyone who hears you try to convince them of your point of view is going to be negatively affected by it. I don't mean affected in, I mean affected in an emotional way. That they are going to see you as arrogant. They're going to see you as trying to force your religion on them. And they're not going to like it. And so we can't just talk about our faith. We can't even just talk about what our faith should/could look like. They say Christians are really loving, but then not actually be really particularly uniquely loving. We only can show it in a culture like this, where pluralism and intolerance of people who are trying to force their worldview on other people are the norm. We simply have to live the Christian life. And that, I think, is going to do more good work than anything. Once we're unplugged, we're going to show the people who are plugged in that there is a different way to live. You can't, Morpheus says this in the movie too, you can't just tell somebody about the Matrix. They have to see it. I hope that we would do that too. And that's exciting. I was thinking about video games and sort of sci-fi movies, and this is my main point. So if you stuck with me, good job. Like in sci-fi and movies, sci-fi movies and sci-fi video games, the beauty of it is you can live a life vicariously through the video game or the movie that is totally awesome, with no fear that you're actually going to die. Or if you're playing a role-playing game, video game, your character has a lot of things you have to take care of on it, and a lot of little challenges and games that it plays. But if you die in the video game, you don't actually die, right? That's one of the differences between the Matrix and video games. Is in the Matrix, if you die in the Matrix, you also die in the real world. But what if real life could be like that video game? Where what you're living right now is real, and it requires skill, and it matters, but when you die, you don't actually die. And so you have the freedom to do in this life things you would never do if you were playing a video game. Or like you're playing a video game, you jump across like a huge chasm because you're like, well, if I don't make it, I get another life. I'm not saying you should jump across a huge chasm as a Christian right now, but you have the ability to live without fear. Because you know that when this life ends, you have another life. And it's a life that doesn't end. And it's a life that's far better. And it's a life that's far more glorious. And it's a life with your resurrected body where you get to do all the things that you wanted to do to the max. If you love video games, you should love Christianity. because it is essentially the same thing, only better. Because in this life, you're already an expert. You don't have to play the game a long time to get good at it. You're already good at it. You've been good at it. You're alive. You're living. You're providing for yourself, providing for your family, doing a whole bunch of things that God has given you skills to do. And every little challenge that you come up against, that's part of the game. It's part of the life. But you know that if you fail, you have another life coming. I think sometimes the lament about young Christians is that they don't believe in their faith anymore because, it's just too boring. We need to make it more exciting. And we think that making it more exciting means like bigger bands and bigger lights and bigger screens and more entertaining stuff. Why not just show them that everything that they already desire in video games or in fantasy or in dystopian future novels is the Christian faith? Only the Christian faith doesn't get bought at Chapters. The Christian faith doesn't get played on an Xbox. The Christian faith is real. It's tangible. It's life. We get to live it every day. I don't want to go much longer than that. I just wanted to share with you those things. So if you like any of these things that I'm talking about, make sure you like this video, subscribe to our channel, tune in for our daily devotions every week, and I'll see you for worship tomorrow. God bless you. Have a good weekend.